Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Mohammad Homayoun Bash, and I am the director of the Jaffer Institute for Interfaith Dialogue and Education in Miami-Dade College. We are part of Miami-Dade's Office of Changemaking Education and Social Innovation. The Jaffer Institute is a relatively new addition to Miami-Dade College. We began, as a matter of fact, in March 2020, and that's right about when COVID hit us. So that's probably one of the reasons why you haven't heard as much about us as you would probably under normal circumstances. But to give you a quick overview of the Jaffer Institute, we have three mandates, three main functions within Miami-Dade College. Curricular function, which is about diversifying Miami-Dade College's course offerings. So far, the Jaffer Institute has added 3 new courses that are currently being offered. I am teaching them at Miami-Dade College, and they are Islam in the Modern World, Islam and America, and Comparative Politics of the Middle East and North Africa. So if you're interested in any of those classes, please feel free to enroll. I think come summer, I'm teaching North Africa and the Middle East class. Also, we're going to be adding 3 additional interdisciplinary courses to Miami-Dade College. And those are going to be about environmental politics and ethics, Introduction to Peace Studies, and Religion in Global Politics. I think we will be in a position to offer those in spring 2022, hopefully once all the bureaucratic process goes smoothly. Also, we do co-curricular stuff, which is about faculty development and enrichment, and essentially incentivizing MDC faculty to incorporate interfaith and intercultural literacy into their teaching and into their syllabus. And we also do community engaged activities. And I would consider this, what we're doing today, the book talk, as part of co-curricular / community engaged activities, because I know that there are some folks from the community who are here as well. And here we're trying to build a bridge between Miami-Dade College and the South Florida community at large. We'll do, hopefully once the COVID restrictions are lifted, events on the Ramadan, the fasting month on the Islamic calendar. We'll do also stuff about Andalusia, about the interfaith, intercultural background of the Iberian Peninsula, some historical stuff, some more contemporary stuff. So be on the lookout for those. But enough about me and the Institute. Let's get to our event today. I am very honored and fortunate that Professor Susan Lichman agreed to moderate and to essentially conduct this interview with our author today. And as you guys, most of you guys, I'm sure, are familiar with Professor Lichman. She's an award-winning public speaker and communications professor at Miami-Dade College's Homestead campus. I had the good fortune of getting to know Professor Lichman back in 2017 when I had another function in Miami-Dade College. So I'm happy that we continued that connection, and hopefully we'll do bigger, better things moving forward. And I'm gonna just toss things over to Professor Lichman to introduce our author and her book, and I'll just sit back and watch. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for being here. Mohammed, very generous of you. I have to tell all of you, you may not know this, but Mohammed actually had an office on our campus. So you know what? To us, he's like family. He absolutely is. And it's just delightful to have this chance to bring this program to the wider Miami-Dade College community, but of course, our campus got tapped. So I feel very honored and very delighted that I can be the one bringing this program from the Jaffer Institute, and our amazing author, our guest speaker, Dr. Sertaç Sehlikoglu, is a social anthropologist, and she studies issues related to subjectivity, intimacy, and desire. Now, right now, that may not mean a lot to you, but she's going to start getting into a little bit what her work is all about. And I think you're going to find it fascinating. She focuses on intangible aspects of human subjectivity that enable people to change and transform social life, among other things. Now, she is a prolific researcher, author. Her latest work, a book, Working Out Desire, Women, Sport, and Self-Making in Istanbul. Can you see that? You saw it from the picture, everyone, right? So, right, from the picture in the flyer, this has been called, quote, a very important and original addition to the understudied field of exercise culture. Yes, exercise culture among Middle Eastern women, said a University of Florida professor, Tamik Sorek. Now, in this new book, Dr. Sehlikoglu examines what's the urban trend of, quote, interest and curiosity in sport as an object of desire shared by a broad and diverse group of women. So I know a lot of you, right, wanted to talk in your speeches coming up about the benefits of exercise and so forth and so on. She can tell you, and she will tell you an awful lot about what she is learning and has learned about this subject vis-a-vis women in the Turkish culture. She is currently a senior research associate at University College London's Institute for Global Prosperity. And she's also a visiting senior research fellow at the Centre of Islamic Studies at the University of Cambridge. Previously, she held an Abdullah Mubarak al-Sabah Fellowship at Pembroke College and a Gibbs Travelling Fellowship at Newnham College in Cambridge. Now, she is a native of Istanbul, but as she told you, she's in London. She lives in the United Kingdom, but she's also previously studied in Montreal and Toronto. So definitely a woman of the world, and I am delighted to welcome her to our platform today. Let's all please give it up, show your faces, give it up for Dr. Sehlikoglu. That's how we welcome our speakers. Woohoo!
Thank you. That's such a lovely introduction. I don't know what to say from this point, but I think I'll just start with thank you. Thank you, Susan, for the lovely introduction, and thank you, Mohammed, for the invitation. I'm really excited about this book talk from across the pond, which is a very British way of expressing this particular distance we are having, right? So what I'll do is I'll start with, sharing some visuals first, and then as soon as I did that, I lost, okay, here. Okay, so let me just speak about the book, and then with the Q&A, we can open up a bunch of issues related to the book, related to my work, related to my broader research interests. I don't know how familiar you are with anthropology overall anyway, but this book is an ethnographic account of women's desires. So I will open up the notion of desire and perhaps with the Q&A a little bit further, but for me as a researcher, the issue was not very much about defining desire, but studying desire. So you need to think like a researcher, right? You're a researcher in the field. How are you going to capture desire? How are you going to study it, turn it into an object of analysis? That was quite a challenge. What I did is I first chose a particular object of desire that was the urban trend of, I will say the Turkish phrase first and then I will translate, spor merakı, which literally means interest or curiosity in sport, spor merakı. Those who are familiar with Greek, they would also recognize meraki as a word. And spor merakı, this interest or curiosity in sport enjoys the wide following among over, I'll give you the number, 1.5 million women in Istanbul. So Istanbul's population is 18 million. So once I chose the object of desire, that's curiosity in sport, what was left for me to do was to trace it. So in my book, I look at the ways in which Istanbulite women use spor merakı as a tool to manifest their desiring self. So they establish a self that is desiring, and they have to use a tool, a reference to do it through is the main issue. So I'm guessing that when I say sport, like exercising women, etc., you might be picturing what you're familiar with. So I will give you a taste of, wait, what they look like. Ooh. That's women exercising in public parks. They're walking past and using these outdoor gyms. Right? Like I have a bunch of chapters and parts where I describe this kind of gender segregation, even in the park, etc. But that's what we call sporty aunties look like, right? But of course, for something to be turned into an object of desire, and that's a kind of social scientific part, it must have some sort of significance in that particular context. And sports was providing a perfect lens as an object of desire. And that is because sports has been used by the Republican Turkey as a tool for transformation from the 1930s and onwards. What was happening was, beginning from 1930s, the Republican Nationalist Project of Turkey has promoted exercise to create a new, healthy, Western, civilized bodies, right? They have implemented compulsory physical education classes and initiated annual youth and sports festivals. And these photos are from those festivals, actually. They were annual. And the state-forced investments have marked women's involvement in sport as an elite activity, on the one hand. On the other hand, simultaneously, it had a double-edged sword relationship with normative femininity that was already existing in this geography. So bodily movements associated with sports and exercise, such as, just imagine all these movements, right? Running or jumping, are actually considered juvenile in Turkey and in the broader Middle East. Therefore, it was a threat to ideal femininity. The same movements were also objects of sexual control and sexual harassment. So if you're a woman jumping up and down, then you are an easier target for sexual harassment in public space. So that's one part of the double-edged sword. Of course, whereas it was also idealized. So there's something like kind of quite pressurizing over women's bodies, right? Of course, the contrasts between expectations of the state and of social norms, both heavily gendered, had created a tension, right? And as a result of this tension, even after Turkey's decades-long investments into women's sports, what we were seeing in 1980s, like 50 years after all these state investments have started, right, was that there was a public resistance when it comes to women's and girls' participation in sports. The compulsory physical education classes in high schools had been famously opted out by girls with the help of fake medical reports. And so all of a sudden you would be seeing half of the class are not attending, all of them are girls, and somehow all of them had some medical excuse, right? And these annual youth and sports festival celebrations where girls and boys paraded in shorts have also been a matter of public anxiety. So that was past. And so what I was telling there is how women's bodies were put at the center of the social transformation, but somehow using sport as a kind of signifier for change was still there, okay? So, Istanbulite women's spor merakı today, however, does not reflect the Republicanist ideology, the secularist ideology. However, neither it does reflect an immediate fit to the normative expectations. I'm assuming you can see the contrast between these two bodies, right? By the time I started my research, the middle-aged Istanbulite women who went walking in the parks had already become city legends known as sporty aunties, while the outdoor gyms replacing playground and public parks were strange to the majority of Istanbulites. They were nevertheless swiftly discovered by the middle-aged women, often wearing long robes and large headscarves. And the contrasts that I'm depicting here between the unfit, joyful, ordinary, and often covered bodies of Istanbul's sporty aunties and the fit, disciplined, serious, less covered, and elite bodies of early Republican sportswomen form actually the heart of this research. The contrast is beautiful to me to look at. These contrasts present one of the few occasions when the veil drawn over women's agentive desires become relatively more transparent and can be captured ethnographically speaking. I try to study, you have seen this, I turned off the volume, and I try to study this multi-layered and admittedly very colorful design selves of Istanbulite women in my book. What I did was I took a feminist approach. I refused to simply see Istanbulite women as somehow some sort of mindless followers of a neoliberal trend. And instead, what I do is I develop a multi-layered analysis on how women use spor merakı to manifest a desiring self that takes them out of domestic zone. And it takes them out of domestic zone, not just physically, but also emotionally and also imaginatively, to be honest. So my research project and the extensive fieldwork have allowed me to develop a new approach, actually, vis-a-vis number of classic and contemporary themes in anthropology of the Middle East. I did a number of things. I'll just summarize it for you. I centralized the notion of desire at the center of my analysis. I defined desire in order to gloss a wide range of aspirations and needs and longings. Therefore, desire in my work is beyond the moment it is felt or experienced, and it's way beyond it, right? It's formed through a series of local and historical makings, and I kind of elaborated on the historical aspect just a little bit. I formulate desire as a human capacity to seek new possibilities and human ability to dream and fantasize. And what I say is all of these elements are actually not only aspects of human formation, human subjectivity, but also they are crucial and central forms of human agency. These are the ones that frees us, that are able to free us from control mechanisms. And it is this agentive capacity of desiring selves that enables Istanbulite women to transform the meanings and categories that address them, that limit their bodies, that limit their physicalities, towards the formation of a collective trend. Spor merakı is in the way I see it, as a product of their ability to act against multiple and often opposing norms, right? And just to say, these multiple and opposing norms would mean a woman should cook well, she should host well, she should also stay fit, she should also have multiple kids and look after them quite well and also work. And these kind of multiple norms in everyday life are contrasting with each other with their demands. You can't possibly both be a good host and be super skinny and also be a good guest, because you would be fed with 7 different types of food at a time. Anyway, in contrast to resistance, what women do is they use this agency in order to purposefully be unthreatening. So they don't they don't oppose, they don't go to riots, they don't form a political resistance. Instead, they choose very unthreatening and often very divergent, unenunciated ways of getting away from the control mechanisms, right? And of course, because of these elements, this particular type of agency that I was able to write about was formerly escaping from the ethnographic or the anthropological gaze. So that's why it was quite exciting for me to complete. When I'm finishing, I'd like to finish with this marvelous painting. I really, really love this painting. It is by Palestinian artist Laila Shawa. She was born in Gaza. And I think it visually describes how we often imagine the combination of these two things I always talk about, desire and Muslim women, because it's as if they are somehow incompatible, and they're they're imagined or assumed incompatible. They are not incompatible, like my research is a good proof of that. But the way we imagine is exactly like that, because in our imagination, desire is something so temporary, it can fade away, it can melt down. And whatever forms the Muslimhood of women is veiled, right? It's kind of, it should be preventing them from reaching out this decaying desire with their veil. Whereas my interlocutors, my research participants show that's not the case at all. They're Muslims, but they're not simply or just Muslims either, right? They have multiple elements in their personalities, in their identities. And that's also one of the reasons why redefining their subjectivities and redefining desire became such a fascination for me. Because they were quite fascinating, basically. So I will stop here.
Wonderful.
And maybe continue with the Q&A.
Well, wonderful. I'm going to start by asking a couple of questions, and certainly one of them is a question about your own upbringing. What would lead you, right? What would lead you to want to explore this in more depth? We know that you grew up in Istanbul, but tell us a little bit more about how you grew up and how the impact of being surrounded perhaps by sports figures may have influenced you as you grew up.
Yeah, thank you. It's actually very interesting to try to learn the world from academic books and then being a first-hand witness to it, right? So my father was a national athlete. He was a marathon runner. And he had been, even when I was growing up, he was still continuing. He had been retired from his professional life, but he was still like in close kind of friendship with a number of sports people. Also, for several years, he was the physical therapist to the national soccer team of Turkey. So these are all very fancy positions, let me tell you that, right? In terms of, you know, whom he know and then whom we were surrounded with. And then I studied sociology, and first I have 2 undergrad degrees, first in Istanbul. And then I had a chance to read all these, you know, anthropological books about women in the Middle East. This is a broad subject. And then you really like what you're reading. I'm not criticizing like big people, especially some of them are those I really, really admire. But then when you put these books side, like when you read them one after the other, the picture you get is that these women have horrible lives, right? As if like they're always like, it's always about honor and veil and this and that and then and violence but that's not what's going on in everyday life. I know this as a first-hand witness. So when during my time in Montreal, when I was doing my second undergrad, I had a chance to combine this my you know upbringing experience, right, and my frustration with the literature. And how about I said I do a research about leisure. So my initial starting point was leisure and pleasure, actually. I was working with, Mohammed might know her, Homa Hutfar. And Homa suggested a title, which was very sexy. She said, "Leisure and Pleasure Under the Veil" should be your title. That was the title I was using for my master's applications, but then it turned into this. So I think that's the short answer.
Wonderful. Did you, by the way, just out of curiosity, do you have siblings?
I have one sister. She's a dentist. Yeah, but when we were growing up. So she's only 1 year younger than me. Actually, 3 days minus. So a year minus 3 days. But we were like, my father was taking us to his. They do exercise very frequently, and he was making us race a little bit, and it was also fun. We were racing in the pool. And, yeah.
No, this is awesome. So in other words, he supported your development in this direction, regardless of gender.
Yeah, of course, very much so. Yes.
That's wonderful, wonderful. How much would you say that well, first of all, let's get into the research itself. Now, I remember reading that there were 3 different focus groups, right? Or there were several focus groups, and how many women did you interview, would you say, in the course of this entire study that are represented in the book? And in the individual focus groups, I remember reading one was focusing on aging, the topic of aging, yes, another on pregnancy, and another on the topic of religion.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the focus groups themselves, how many women were involved with this, and the kinds of things you asked them during the focus group sessions?
The focus groups were very hard to form, actually. So first about my fieldwork, right? So this is really a product of my PhD dissertation, which means I spent a year in Istanbul to conduct my fieldwork. However, I had also spent a couple of months in Istanbul about 4 years prior to my PhD fieldwork. And I also included the data from there, because the best part is, since I'm interested in how women are changing their environment without immediately challenging them, right?
Yes.
And that's what the social scientists, we are always obsessed about. There has to be a resistance for us to kind of see women's liberation. So there is women's liberation, but they're not doing anything directly. But the kind of my pre-PhD and during PhD fieldwork was giving me a perspective about the changes, and that was very valuable. So I included them both in the book. And then I divided my 1 year period of fieldwork into 3. And the first, in the first part, I didn't do any interviews. I was just exercising with women, making friendships, taking notes, so they know I'm a researcher. I'm this weird person in the changing room who's taking notes. Think about this. So they approached to you, and then you became friends, and I never asked any questions. I was just taking notes and making friends. And the second part,
up to you, and they're starting to open up to you as they become friendlier with you. Yes.
Yes. And then in the second stage, I was doing interviews, and this has helped me to see certain tendencies, about whom they are looking up to, like all these media figures, right? And also when they had started doing exercise. Because again, because of the very tension I had explained in my presentation earlier, the tension between how, Turkish state was constantly trying to encourage girls to exercise more, and the kind of social norms that were quite questioning, that were kind of limiting women. Most of them weren't that much involved in exercise, sports at all, like up until a certain age. So there were certain points in their lives that when they started going to the gyms. One is around menopause, or just before, maybe 10 years prior to menopause, around age 40, 45, or just after they give birth to their first or second babies. And then around that time, everybody was also asking me about religion. So I then in the end decided to run 3 focus groups. One was focusing on religion, so that women would sit together, talk about religion freely, and this entire thing would be part of my data. The other one is about pregnancy, and that was a very, very heavy conversation, including all the descriptions of all sorts of pain, and I don't have a kid. So I had to spend a week to recover from that focus group. But I'm still lucky that I'm not a guy. And then the third one was about age and aging, and all the conversations were about, back aches and the menopause and the periods, etc. So very womanly conversations. But I have to say, in the third part, I was not just doing focus groups based on what I had seen in the second part. I was also reaching out to celebrities, which was so much fun, because all these people they had mentioned, my interlocutors had mentioned during interviews, this Pilates guru who was this like top model in Turkey, and these daytime TV shows. I was there. And the best part is my interlocutors were seeing me on TV with them and coming up to me to speak more. So the third part was the most fun, actually, with the focus groups and the interviews with celebrities and all these things.
That's so cool. That is so cool. In the process of, by the way, how many women would you say altogether from the
in duration of the entire time? I think about 70 something. I forgot the number really. But
it's sizable, several dozen.
Yes, but 40 something of them were from the second fieldwork, for my PhD fieldwork. And there was, I also include the number of people who are like the third parties, like the celebrities or the gym owners or the trainers, etc., etc.
Very, very interesting. And of course, each different audience, if you will, has a different vision and a different perspective that would really add to the research and provide so much more depth, right?
Yeah, definitely.
One of the things that I found incredibly interesting is exploring that, the notion of desire and what is the desire, what is the motivation. It's not always clear. There's many different reasons. And one of the things that I found extremely interesting was the idea that for many women, the idea of going to a gym could potentially be a way of achieving some alone time, some independent time away from their families. Can you explore that a little bit more? In this country, I think it would be nice to even find out from some of you who are in the room. Think about, those of you who go to the gym. Do you go exclusively to work out? Do you go exclusively to build muscle? Or do you also go to meet up with your friends? Do you also go because of the social connections that you will form? So think about this in your own life so that when she answers the question, this might help to steer you towards some follow-up questions that you may have, since I know so many of you are active, right, in going to gyms and so forth. But I'd love to know more about what are the different motivations that you discovered that that many of the women or, different groups of women tend to have, but why they go to a gym, let's say, in the first place.
Thank you. Maybe I should start with explaining. Remember the part I was saying how women were being deceitful actually to multiple control mechanisms to open up space for themselves.
Yes.
It's very easy to deceive all the systems or the individuals who are trying to control your bodies if you're excused to do exercise. So I'll give you just an example, right? So the idea about exercise that comes from the state, right? From all these kind of people who have the state ideology, including the trainers, is for individuals to gain sports consciousness, okay? Sports consciousness, which means like exercising, because exercise is a product of enlightenment. If you're an enlightened person, you would be interested in arts and sports, and et cetera, et cetera. So my interlocutors were telling to their trainers that, oh, I was coming here just to lose weight before, but now I have sports consciousness. The same people, right? They go, they speak over the phone, when they're sitting next to me, or when they're in the gym, right? In the changing room, they speak to their husbands and they're like, I'm at the gym, honey. I'm coming here just to be beautiful for you, which is not the real reason for them, right? It's a way of opening up space for them. And if they have really troublemaker mother-in-laws, and in certain parts of the world, Middle East and East Mediterranean, including Italy and Greece, like they are the matriarch, the kind of mother-in-laws are the matriarch, right? It's a huge thing. So to them, they give a completely different story. I have a bad backache and my doctor has prescribed me to do it. So all of a sudden, with these different explanations, they just find a way to get into the gym. And getting into the gym is having a space that's not controlled by the neighbors who can gossip. That's not controlled by their relatives who are controlling. That's not controlled by their family duties. And these women wake up at 6 a.m. They first prepare breakfast, and then the kids are, once the kids are fed, they go to school, and then they clean the table and prepare it again. They refresh the tea for their husbands this time, right? It's there is this nonstop, and then they prepare there's this initial preparation for the dinner, which means like soaking the chickpeas, etc., all sorts of things. Like their time is so taken over, and they just need to physically, spatially, and temporally get out of these kind of control mechanisms.
Emotionally.
Yes. So in my book, I speak about time as a time regime when I'm writing about these controls, and finding a kind of temporal space that can break that temporal regime is such a crucial part of forming their more autonomous and less controlled selves. And it's very crucial. So it's not just about finding a physical space that's freed from the control. It's also the temporal break from all these control mechanisms. So maybe I can expand Susan's question a little bit by saying, is there something that you do that gives you the sense of autonomy? Because one of the, sorry.
No, forgive me for interrupting, like what we might call alone time.
Yeah, self-time. Like, so one of my interlocutors was saying how going to gym for her was in the same category with getting her hair done, or, like something that she does for just herself. And these women with all the family duties, they're doing almost everything for everyone else, right? So maybe we can talk about the things you do for yourself. It can be hobbies too, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. But it's very interesting to think about how in different cultures around the world, this is one of the things that I don't know that our students necessarily, this is really one of the whole purposes, I guess, of the Jaffer Institute, right? To explore all of these different ways that different cultures perceive our identities, our gender identities, and so forth. And so just the fact that there are perhaps certain societal expectations, right, within the culture, and for women to find different ways to basically, again, not to leave the culture, of course, but to find a way to still fulfill a certain desire.
Can I say something about desire? It's
yes.
This is actually both the women's lack of self-time and women's relationship with desire had been discussed. Actually, both of them have been discussed in the US very recently, in the last 3 years, very extensively too. Like like I don't know if there are any individuals here, like any of your students with children, or with having both jobs and education, trying to juggle with both at the moment. But having self-time is being discussed as such a gendered issue. That's number one.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just specific to a particular part of the world.
Yes.
Number two is how like following a desire can be quite gendered as well. A number of And we kind of, in the Western world, the way we discuss it, maybe not through desire, but through ambition, right? In Turkey, that was through desire. Like my interlocutors were very, very careful in articulating their desires in unthreatening terms. Like, for instance, instead of saying that's something I really enjoy and I do for myself, right? Instead they say, oh, I'm just passing time, as if like passing time is something you can say if you are bored, if you don't have much to do. They're busy, right? So there's a part in the book where I explore this. During the interview itself, I kind of make my interlocutors to speak a little bit more. And then it becomes apparent that she doesn't want to say that, oh, I'm doing this because I really enjoy, I just want to be on my own and I want something that I do just for myself, right? Because it sounds selfish. It sounds selfish to themselves as well. So in the Western world, we think about these things through ambition. Like if a woman is ambitious, we have a tendency to be more critical to them. Whereas if it's a man, he's following his dreams, right? So there is an element where I explore about these themes through like norms. Yes, I do mention the norms and the normative control, but I don't want to be too critical because I'm actually more attracted to the ways women are opening up these creative spaces for themselves. But we can actually find elements that resonates us, maybe not in our own lives, but in the lives of, all the women who had sacrificed their time for us, maybe. Yeah.
You're making such excellent points, especially how this is not just in Turkey, but definitely in the West as well. But I do want to come back to the issue of, for example, gyms. There are, of course, some same-sex gyms in this country as well. But I understand that in Turkey, you mentioned in the book that there has been this enormous proliferation of women-only gyms.
Yeah.
So can you address that just a little bit? And perhaps also touch on, to what do you attribute that? This incredible rise in physical spaces, women in gyms, but women only gyms.
Yeah. So the gyms are either women on, like the gyms I went to as part of my research. There are a number of mixed gyms, of course, but a large majority of them are either women-only gyms or mixed gyms with women-only hours. And when I was initially doing this research in 2008, our expectation, so my and my mentor's expectation, was to see some sort of a link between the new political rise in Turkey, which is more Islamic, right? And their investment into the sports spaces to change the society. And then as a researcher, when I went there, I realized that was far from the case. I mean, they might have their own agendas, but they operate agendas in all sorts of places, and opening up space for women to exercise was not for a political agenda. It was for, well, let's put it as bluntly as possible. That was for the money. So like because once one of them experimented with opening up, like having women on the hours only, right? That was Jamal Kamaji, I think. It's one of the big gyms. Like the demand was so high. And then they realized that there's a good source for getting more memberships and there's this good financial source here. So right now, if you look at Turkey, and I do speak about a couple of those places, there is this big franchise, for instance, that is considered to be a big secular feminist franchise. BFITS, that's the name. It's kind of run by the women, owned by the women, and attended by the women. So it's women only. And they still survive because there is something about running a women-only gym that's very attractive to anyone, even though you are not religious or traditional or whatever you call it, right? And I want to say a couple of things about that. So what happens is, that's related to one of the points I raised in my talk, actually. What happens is, if you're a woman, in public sphere in Turkey, anywhere in Turkey, you know that like your control of your sexual body in public space is not just about wearing or not wearing hijab, right? It's about how long your top is, the one that you wear on your tight jeans, for instance, right? You're kind of trying to find ways of avoiding sexual harassment while getting dressed up in a manner that you will like. And you would change your dress a little bit depending on the neighborhood maybe you are going to. But then what happens is, once you start exercising, your entire control of your sexual body start collapsing. You lose your control, right? Your boobs start jumping up and down, and then if you're raising your legs, and then your shorts will come, your pants will come down. It's kind of like from the, so they kind of, the women were explaining to me how they had to tuck their pants into their socks. This is my hand. This is not my hand. This is my, like, imagine this as a foot, right? So in order for their skin not to be revealed, or if they're like, if I'm exercising in a mixed environment, I'll have to tuck my shirt as well so that my tummy won't be shown. So you lose your control of your body, and therefore you want to be able to exercise somewhere where no man will be staring at your body. One more point. That's very specific to the Middle East, and some of you might have heard the term evil eye. The term actually comes from nazar, and that word doesn't mean evil eye. It means eye. It's actually strong eye, which means like if you look at somebody with a very strong gaze, right, then it can bring misfortune. But then it doesn't, the strength doesn't have to come from evil. The strength can come from strong love as well. So you're familiar with this aspect of gaze from the Middle East, right? And you are familiar with kind of, you've heard the evil eye blue thing maybe. But actually in this particular culture, gaze has an ability to touch, okay? So if a man is staring at your body, you would feel as if he's touching your body, and he would perform with his gaze and gazing practice as if he's touching your body. And that would feel extremely harassing. You would feel harassed, like sexually harassed. So you want to avoid the look. You want to avoid the gaze. And Women on Space enables you to have that space, basically. And I think the main determinant of the increase of this, so basically in a very short span of time, the number of women-only gyms between my two research period had increased 20-fold. That's a crazy number.
It's astounding. It's huge.
It's a crazy number. And that was because it's because of the neoliberalism dominating the country, not like the Islamic agenda of the rulers. It's more like how neoliberalism had enabled women to express what they want as customers, and that's how it gained currency.
Mm-hmm. And thank you very much. I'm also wondering about just following up from what you were just saying, what about the notion, though, of sporty aunties who walk in public spaces, who are not necessarily going to the gym, and who are dressed in traditional attire primarily, and who seem to be sort of getting involved without abandon. They'll jump into these playground spaces, walk in the parks. Is it that they are not fearful of the gaze? Is it that they do they feel they are too old to be harassed, or are they in fact harassed still? To what extent are they the subject of this type of feeling that you've described? Tell us a little bit about the experience of the sporty aunties in the open public spaces, not within the gyms.
So of course they don't do that extensive exercise. They're using these outdoor gyms, which are like a bunch of very heavy equipment. You might be familiar with some of them. I don't know if you have them in Miami, but I showed them in my video. And you must have noticed how they were wearing, even if they are normally not wearing a veil, they are still like wearing these like the outer coats, like vest-like, very loose tops. I don't know if you've noticed, but some women who aren't hijabi, right, who are not wearing headscarf, were wearing these like outer coats still.
Yeah.
That's a way of actually reducing the way their breasts show when they're walking fast. Okay. So they do control their public sexualities, as a phrase I use it. They do control their public sexualities by like, instead of running, they are fast walking, right? Instead of jumping up and down, they're using the vehicles that will work out their arms, and these equipment that will work out their arms and their legs, perhaps. But there are still men who come, and you have to kind of imagine this far from, what was this name of this, what was the name of this woman who was doing exercise show in 1970s?
Jane Fonda?
Jane Fonda. So they don't look sexy like Jane Fonda did, right? And she still does, wow. It's more like, what is it with these women that men would find to stare at, to be honest? That's what you would think. But harassment is not a matter of sexual attraction, of course. Harassment is a matter of establishing power over a body. So there are, in the public parks that I went to, following things were happening. If there are certain times of the day, women take over the parks. That's number one. Number two, if a man wants to go there to exercise, they often go with the company of their partners, which is what I had shown actually in one of the videos. Maybe towards the end, you had noticed that there were 4 women and 1 man accompanying. So he is surrounded with family, and that's okay.
I thought that was interesting.
So that's so, if he can be accompanied by a family member, and that's acceptable, that means he's not a creep. Okay. And number 3, there was a guy who was living alone. He was a teacher, and then he was also a secular, kind of thinks of himself as a secular modern person, and he's a little bit looking down at the rest of the people in the park, to be honest. So what he was doing was the following. So he goes to the park around the same time women do, but he needs to make sure nobody misunderstands him as a creep. Nobody mistakes him for a creep. So what he was doing was, everybody is walking clockwise in that track, and he's walking counterclockwise, so that all these women can see where he's looking at, which is not their bodies. Number 3, there are still some creep who are going to the parks, staring at women's bodies, and women are just, okay, whatever, he can sit there, we don't mind.
So in other words, some have come to a point where they ignore it.
They ignore it, yes, but it's not like still being surrounded by a large number of men, etc., etc. It's more like there are a couple of creeps, and we all agree that they are creeps, and we made peace with it. And actually, these are the points where I think the change is happening. At the moment, women start ignoring is when these norms start falling apart little by little. Okay.
So in other words, it's partially what is helping to transform this aspect of the culture, perhaps?
Yeah, but it's not like directly confrontational. They still want they still want the power of taking over the park, right? But they are making peace with. I have one more example, but there's a question. Maybe I should give the second example afterwards.
No, you can give it. J-Rock, were you coming in? Were you trying to come in to ask a question?
I think there's a Sharif.
Oh, Sharif. All right, because what I'm going to ask everyone to do, please feel free to start putting your questions in chat, like as soon as you like. You don't have to wait. Start putting your questions in, because I have 1 or 2 more questions, but I definitely would love to start asking your questions. And I'd love for Dr. Sertac to see your questions so that she can address them directly.
I should give the example maybe quickly then.
Please do. And then of course, Mohammed, feel free to jump in as well if you have questions.
So in one of these interviews, I was talking to women, and then this particular woman was, I think, 43 years old back then, and she was telling how with her female relative. They were going to not a kind of outdoor gym or a park, but there are these couple of outdoor equipments installed around the corner of their house. And they were going there and they were working out as this, two female relatives. They work out. And one of the things they do during workout is to sit on this leg extension, which is you sit and then there's a device between your legs and you open and close your legs. So this creep comes every time they go there, sits right across to them and starts staring at their crotch. And they hate it. And they try to find the security guard, the security guards around in those areas usually. And then the guy comes and kicks him out, but then he comes back. And then they come to this point where they don't stop going there. That's the important point. They still go there. And they come to this point when they start ignoring this creep.
Yes.
And it somehow gives them power. And I call this the daring mahram. That I kind of published a couple of things about this. One is the book, of course, and then another article. And I think that because there is this power mechanism between harassing and the harasser and the harassed, being able to ignore makes them almost, it kind of makes them eunuch, to be honest. I mean, it takes away this power, because that's the penetrating power comes from. That's how he's trying to make them uncomfortable, right?
Exactly.
So I'm not using this word lightly at all. I'm kind of using it very thoughtfully.
That's an excellent example. I'm really glad you shared that example.
And then he stops coming to harass them as well, because it's not working at one point.
Exactly. A very interesting example. And probably, I think, then would it be fair to say that it has been more in recent years that women have themselves changed to the point where they now feel more secure to challenge that gaze, or in the way of ignoring it? Would it have been, would you say 10 years ago, 20 years ago, would there have been a different response from the women to someone sitting right across from them and gazing at them in that way? Would they have then ceased to come back to the park out of fear or intimidation? Would you say that it is now changing? And over what period of time has that been occurring?
I have a chance to ethnographically compare 2008 and 2012. There's definitely a change between these two times.
And that's only 4 years.
In 4 years' time, but it's over a period of time.
Sure.
But I can also say is with every liberation, there comes a backlash. So right now we are also witnessing a moment of this kind of very uncomfortable backlash and this kind of, even though it's not coming from women's resistance to anything immediately, the women's liberation and autonomy, women gaining autonomy, seem to be threatening masculinity culture in Turkey, and that's arguably one of the reasons of the increase of femicide in Turkey, which is in a very horrible, steep increase.
Mm-hmm. Could you define for the students what that word means, femicide?
Women's murders and violence against women, especially in the private sphere, which means, amongst couples, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Like the domestic zone and private sphere. I think Sharif has kept, raising his hand.
Sharif, are you trying to ask a question?
I can unmute Sharif if he wants to ask. Let me unmute you, Sharif. Just give me a second.
Oops. Yes, good. You unmute. Okay. Anyone else, please?
All right, I'm a philosopher. This is how I think about it. I think that this the sexual schemas come from the insecurity that us as males and females have, because when you grow up, back in the 60s, women used to always wear dresses, men used to always wear jeans. So when you grow up, you're always going to think that women wearing dresses are attractive. So you're going to look at women and women are going to look at you. But with the insecurity, it'll make you overthink it. For real. And also when you grow up as a man, you're supposed to have a wallet and money
Oops, we're losing you.
Your voice is gone.
Sharif, we lost you. You might need to type it into chat because we can't hear you now.
Oh, I don't think he can hear us either. I think there's something with the connection. Can you hear us, Sharif?
Yes, yeah. So it's always going to be two sides because we're forced to either be a man or a woman, just how we're forced to be black, white, Spanish, Arabic. Wa alaikum salam. It's just that's how we are as humans. We're selective. We're very selective. When you see someone who's homeless, one person will give him money, one person won't. We're just selective like that. Just how it is. And that's very sad. We can't, it's been 2,000 years and we can't get over this stuff. It's sad. Like people think purses, well, this is not a purse, but see, already. See how a purse, satchel, bag, two sides.
So in other words, people are deriving meaning from the object or the dress or the color of one's skin or whatever it is because of labels that we as a society assign. Is that what you're saying, Sharif? I'm not sure, but
I think you wanted to make the point. No, that's a good point, actually.
Yes. Yeah.
But we also need to understand how like these aspects are good in. Okay, so there is one point I think it's important to understand how we as anthropologists don't treat terms as equal terms. Like for instance, we don't look at women across the world and come up with a definition of womanhood and or come up with a definition of being a cis woman, right? It's kind of, it doesn't work like that. What we do is we go to the field and we study it ethnographically. And then it kind of gives us this ability to, like if I must give an example from the context of North America and race, instead of saying, oh, black and white are two categories. If you study it ethnographically, then you realize how the entire power mechanism is actually established in very different ways for each group, which is why it's not like I kind of like it's I think it's a term, it's the job of maybe political sciences and often philosophy to be able to compare two things. But when it comes to the like sociologists and anthropologists specifically, we kind of prefer to choose focusing on one particular group and study it ethnographically and study its relationship with its surroundings. So I agree with you in principle, but as an ethnographer, I can't make these comparisons, obviously. Like I can't speak about, I can speak about masculinity culture within the limits of my ethnographic data, right? And that's slightly different than being able to think about, you know, oh, you know, like these are the categories. Let's talk this through comparatively through these categories. So who does what? So we can't really do that. It's kind of, we are not equipped to do that.
So is it also, there are relationships that are established between the categories, and is what you're saying in part that we don't necessarily study the categories independent of each other, isolated from each other?
Yes, and also they are not isolated from each other. They are not isolated from the broader operations that are determining their positions either. So yeah, so and then also there's one more thing I think it's important to highlight. When you look at the literature on gender in the Middle East, and you look at the literature from the years, let's say 1960s till 1990s, late 1990s, even today, you realize that a large number of those work focusing on gender are focusing on women or men only. It's either or, and not easily both. And that's because we are looking at a society that has gender segregation. So I won't have access to men-only gyms in the same manner as I have access to women-only gyms, right? The same thing applies to, you know, male access to women-only spaces. They wouldn't have access to women-only spaces. So there's also this aspect of ethnographic access, right? And that's also something we should be very aware of.
Mm-hmm.
Susan, can I ask a quick question too?
Of course, please do. Yes.
Excellent talk, Sertac. I really enjoyed it, and actually, I learned a lot. I mean, I've lived in the Middle East for quite some time, but like looking at things through your prism, I think opens an entirely different, way of viewing like new perspectives. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the impact of this new emerging fitness culture on gender roles. And I think you touched upon it, here and there, and how gender roles are being, are shifting in the Middle East. Because here, being the gym rat that I am, I used to have class pass, and I live in downtown Miami, so I've been, I think, to majority of the gyms in Miami, doing like different types of cardio. I don't know, yoga, Pilates, bar, you name it. I've been there. What I've noticed over the past maybe 10 years is that the fitness culture and its intersection with gender differentiation has shifted even in Miami. For example, I think women used to be more into like aerobics and like cardio, but now they're also into weightlifting more. So this ideal image of women as thin and slim, and men being like vascular and muscular, I think that is also going through an incremental transformation, even in the West. So I'm wondering how this, like I said, this emerging and as you say, I don't know, 20-fold increase in gyms, how that's impacting gender roles, and by extension family dynamics in an otherwise conservative slash Muslim country like Turkey.
I'm really looking forward to the day when this kind of the idea of being muscular woman is okay will be more accepted in Turkey. We are not there yet. Turkey is not there yet, but I find it fascinating. I follow all these kind of influencers, etc., in the UK and in the US, and I love it. But it's not there. Actually, when I was doing my field work, one of the things that I noticed, women are very careful about avoiding heavy weights when they are kind of lifting them, when they're working out their legs, so, working out in leg extensions, etc. They were really kind of like very afraid of building muscles, because that's one of the things. So the kind of exercise is kind of has this awkward relationship with ideal femininity, right? As I said at the beginning of my talk. So they were very kind of conscious against and about building muscles, right? However, there is something that I find. So I find the kind of the way gender roles shifting, like the gender roles wouldn't shift in the manner we as social scientists expect them to shift, actually. They shift in more creative ways often. So I kind of like, in my ideal world, it would be very, very exciting if the kind of gender crossing would be more, observable, etc. But what was happening is the following. Once you start going to a gym, or outside of a gym, you start exercising regularly, you start building a different posture. A posture it's not about getting slim or not. It's more about how you look more confident on the street. And other research shows similar things are happening in Egypt and Iran as well. But once you have the confident posture, then you are actually in public space, you are carrying yourself differently. And that's kind of more observable apparently in Cairo, where the street harassment is quite high in general. Like once women build this strong posture, they are harassed less. So there is this interesting interplay about gender norms, I'll say. But I want to say, I want to use this as an opportunity to say a couple of things about the way I have studied gender norms through my research. So obviously my women are at least on surface very normative. You need to understand queer sexualities in Turkey are very unenunciated, right? Like, especially I'm doing research about women, and even if there is even when there is a lesbian desire, people wouldn't speak about this. Like, the lesbian desire is very unspoken, unenunciated, etc., etc. Just think of this: women's desires themselves are unenunciated. Like, you can imagine how there's a void of conversation even about lesbian desire. So I didn't capture anything as such. Like, to me, all the data I have gathered were about the kind of how women were fitting into the norms by going to women-only gyms, and it's a way of fitting into. But then it all goes down to two things: one, access, and two, analysis. So where do you locate this data you have collected about all the things women are avoiding, so that they choose, that lead them to choose a women-only space, right? Every kind of normative account women carry to you in your interview, you can actually analyze them as an analysis of norms. And in order to be able to turn this into an analysis of norms, you should actually, the existing normative gender accounts in social sciences wouldn't allow you the space to critically engage with the normative operations of gender and sexuality. They would give you, like in anthropology, if you're a normative person, you would be talking about kinship as of kind of, oh, I'm studying this culture and this is part of the culture. But if you are critically engaging with it, right, you would be doing something more through the margins. So the kind of margin I have captured was, you might know maybe the researcher, the theorist Laurent Berland, who does speak about, that's very interesting work. She speaks about institutions of intimacy, and here's her argument. She says, actually, like normativity might seem like it's about the intimate moment, right? The intimacy between, two heterosexual bodies, and that's the norm, and how they relate themselves to each other is the norm, and it's all determined by the norm. And you might think this normativity is all about that intimate moment, but it's not. It gains intelligibility through public. So then she speaks about institutions of intimacy. And then I turn my entire analysis by using, I find it very fascinating, very useful. And I turn my entire analysis into institutions of intimacy, how institutions of intimacy operate on women's bodies, how they engage with them in public and in private. And I think it kind of is important, even when you are, like your data suggests a normative environment, if you engage with it through the queer critique, then it gives you a more critical analysis. And I kind of am a full believer of it. As I said, there would be data and there would be analysis. And it's important how you combine these two.
Oh, this is fascinating. I'm sure all of you in the room can see now that there is just countless conversations that we could have. And certainly I, for one, and I hope that the rest of you feel the same, I cannot wait to see where your research does continue to lead you, where it continues to take you. This is fascinating stuff. And I think that we have all been incredibly enriched this morning. I'm going to let Mohammed end the program because we are at the end of our class period. So I want to make sure that our students are not held over unduly, but I know that Mohammed wants to say a few words before we go. So before I turn it over to Mohammed, I personally want to thank you eternally for this beautiful program.
Oh, thank you. You're very kind.
I really hope that we can host you again, because this has just opened all kinds of new thoughts and new conversations. And I'm very
being
excited.
very generous with your kindness. Thank you.
No, I'm sincere. It's the sort of thing that we all very much benefit from. Mohammed, thank you so much for bringing us together.
You, Professor Lichman. Guys, before you leave, can you turn on your cameras for a second so we can take a collective?
Oh, good idea. Group shot.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Wait, come on. The rest of you, turn on your cameras quick. He wants to do like a screenshot, right, Mohammed?
Yes, that's the
It's a
plan.
good idea.
Command.
Oh, that's so nice. I wish I was seeing you before.
Okay, that's it. No more courageous. Okay, good, good. I'm liking this. See, we have a lot of brave people here. Okay, just give me 1 second.
Nice, nice.
All right, done. Okay, I'll share it with you. Thank you so much, Professor Lichman, and thank you so much, Sertac, again for really taking this opportunity and really enlightening us. For me, it was very illuminating, educating, and informative. And as Professor Lichman said, hopefully we can continue this conversation and conversations of this type with our students at Miami-Dade College and with the wider community as well. Again, the book is called Working Out Desire, Women, Sport, and Self-Making in Istanbul, one of my favorite cities in the world. And the author and our incredible speaker is Sertaç Sehlikoglu. And I guess that's a wrap for today. Thank you again for sharing your time and donating a little bit of time to us.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. So it was very
Everybody,
generous.
what do we do? How do we show appreciation to our speakers? Come on, let's give it up for our speaker. Woo!
Oh, thank you. As to you who are listening.
Remember, this is a speech class. So thank you all for being here. And students, I know you need to
guys
go.
are beautiful. Look at this. I wish I was seeing you more.
You
Well,
have amazing students, Susan.
I know they're the best. This is a very, very alert and engaged class. I'm
Yeah.
sorry we had to, we were like just getting started. I'm sorry we didn't have more time. But students, any follow-up questions, comments, concerns, I will find a way to get them to Mohammed and to Sertac as well. So just, feel free to send me anything that you would like to share with them.
Absolutely. And also, if you're interested in this type of stuff, make sure you sign up for some of those courses
Yes.
that are being offered. They're not difficult. The names might, come across as a little bit intimidating, but trust me, you're gonna like them.
And now you've met the professor.
Now you met the professor. See.
There you go.
All right. Thanks again. Have a
Thank
wonderful
you.
day.
Thank you very much.
Bye,
Thanks.
everyone. Thank you.
Bye.